I never go camping anymore. Not after what happened in the limestone labyrinth. It was supposed to be a routine survey, another notch in my belt for endangered species conservation. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne, and I'm a bioacoustician specializing in bat populations. Or at least I was. This isn't some campfire tale, a legend whispered among rangers. This actually happened to me, and sometimes late at night I can still hear it. It was late May, almost 3 years ago. The air was thick with the promise of summer, and the forest around the Blackwood Sinkhole Preserve was vibrant with new growth. I'd been tasked with a critical count of a declining population of Indiana bats, Myotis sotilis, known for their distinctive echolocation calls. This particular sinkhole system, an intricate network of limestone caves, was one of their last strongholds in the region. I'd packed my usual gear, high-sensitivity microphones, thermal imaging cameras, my trusty headlamp, and enough MREs to last a week, even though I planned to be out for 3 days tops. It was a beautiful drive out, winding country roads giving way to dense forest. The kind of place where your phone's signal dies miles before you even reach the preserve boundary. That's usually a good thing for me, fewer distractions. The entrance to the main cavern was a jagged maw in the earth, framed by ancient oak trees. Cool, damp air immediately greeted me, carrying that distinct mineral scent of limestone and wet earth. I remember checking my equipment one last time, making sure my recording devices were charged and calibrated. Everything felt normal, mundane even. Just another day at the office, albeit a very dark and subterranean one. My plan was methodical. Set up acoustic monitoring stations at various points deep within the cave system, triangulate their positions, and then spend a full night inside, carefully counting and observing. Bats emerge at dusk, feed through the night, and return to roost before dawn. It's a delicate process, demanding patience and absolute silence. I zipped up my jumpsuit, switched on my headlamp, and took the first step into the darkness. The beam cut through the black, illuminating glittering calcite formations and the slick, damp floor. The air grew colder, and the sounds of the forest vanished, replaced by the profound, muffled silence of the earth. I made my way through the main chamber, past towering stalagmites and stalactites that looked like petrified monsters. After about an hour of careful navigation, I reached a deeper, narrower passage I'd identified as a primary roosting site from previous, less intensive surveys. This was where the real work would begin. I set up my first acoustic array, a series of tiny, almost invisible microphones designed to pick up the ultrasonic calls of the bats. As I worked, securing cables and adjusting sensitivities, a subtle shift occurred. It wasn't a sound, not at first. More like a pressure. The kind you feel when someone is standing very close behind you, even if you can't see or hear them. I paused, my hand hovering over a microphone gain knob, and slowly scanned the beam of my headlamp around the cavern. Nothing. Just shadows dancing on ancient rock. Probably just my imagination, I muttered to myself, the sound of my own voice surprisingly loud in the oppressive silence. Days alone in caves can do strange things to your mind. Still, the feeling persisted, a prickle on the back of my neck. I adjusted my pack, took a deep breath, and tried to focus on my task. Hours passed. The cave became my world. The rhythmic drip of water, the occasional scuttling of an unseen insect, these became the background noise. I was almost done setting up the second array, deep in a side passage known as the Needle, for its narrow, twisting path. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Not a bat call, those are sharp, high-frequency clicks. This was human. Faint, indistinct, just at the edge of hearing, like someone murmuring just out of sight. My heart hammered against my ribs. I froze, holding my breath, straining to hear over the sudden rush in my ears. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking slightly. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. I waited, my headlamp sweeping the darkness. No movement, no response. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the wind, whistling through a fissure. Maybe it was the acoustics of the cave playing tricks, distorting a drip into something more. Or maybe I was just tired. I'd been up since before dawn, driving and then hiking and now navigating this labyrinth. Exhaustion could lead to auditory hallucinations. I told myself that. I needed to tell myself that. Dusk arrived, though you wouldn't know it deep underground. My internal clock told me it was time for the bats to emerge. I settled into a comfortable spot near a large fissure, my headphones on, monitoring the live acoustic feed. The plan was to listen, identify species, and count the distinct echolocation pulses as they flew out to feed. And that's when it started. Through my headphones, amidst the faint flutterings and clicks of the first emerging bats, a new sound bled in. A voice. My voice. 23. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just like my voice, it was my voice. A low, deliberate whisper counting. But counting what? And why in reverse? I ripped the headphones off. The cave was silent again, save for the faint, natural sounds. I stared at the recording device, my heart pounding. Was it a feedback loop? Had I accidentally recorded myself speaking earlier, and now it was playing back? I checked the settings frantically. No, it was on live monitoring. There was no playback activated. I put the headphones back on, my hands trembling. The faint bat calls were still there, like scattered pebbles. And then my voice again. 22. It was coming from inside the cave. From somewhere ahead of me, deeper in the darkness. My own voice counting down. A cold dread seeped into my bones, far more chilling than the cave's damp air. This wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't imagination. I stayed perfectly still, listening. Each count was spaced out, maybe 10 to 15 seconds apart. Enough time for my mind to race, to try and grasp at any shred of a logical explanation. But there was none. The voice was clear, distinct. The tone was exactly mine. My slight speech impediment on the S sound, the way I emphasize certain syllables. 21. The sound seemed to ripple through the very rock, vibrating subtly in the air around me. I could almost feel it, a physical presence emanating from the source of the sound. My headlamp beam, usually a comforting pierce of light, now seemed feeble, barely holding back the encroaching blackness. I pulled out my thermal imager, sweeping it through the cavern. Nothing but cold rock. No heat signature of another living being. Panic started to set in, a cold, sharp knife twisting in my gut. I had to get out. I had to get out now. I fumbled for my pack, desperate to gather my things and make a run for it. But then I hesitated. What if it was just a prank? What if someone had followed me in, knowing my route, and was messing with me? No, that was ridiculous. Who would even know I was here? And why my voice? 20. The count continued, inexorable, like a ticking clock. Every number felt like a hammer blow, driving me deeper into a primal fear. I couldn't move. My muscles felt locked, my breath shallow. I was trapped, frozen by the sheer impossibility of what I was hearing. The voice seemed to be getting closer. Not dramatically, not like a sudden approach, but subtly. The echoes were less pronounced, the clarity sharper. It was still ahead of me, deeper in the cave system, but the distance was undeniably shrinking with each descending number. 19. I squeezed my eyes shut, then forced them open. My headlamp beam began to flicker. A cold sweat plastered my hair to my forehead. My entire body was trembling. I had to fight the urge to scream. What would I even scream at? An echo of myself? This isn't real, I whispered, trying to convince myself. It's just a hallucination. My mind is breaking. But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. The sound was too precise, too chillingly accurate. It wasn't random noise my brain was interpreting. It was a deliberate, sequential countdown. My scientific mind, trained to observe and rationalize, was utterly failing. Every logical explanation had been ruled out. There was no one else in the cave. There was no recording. And yet, the voice continued. 18. My focus was no longer on the bats, no longer on my mission. It was solely on that voice, on that agonizing descent towards zero. What would happen when it reached zero? The question gnawed at me, a terrifying emptiness. As the numbers dropped, the air around me felt colder, heavier. I could almost feel the presence of whatever was making that sound. It was as if the cave itself was holding its breath, waiting. My headlamp beam flickered again, more violently this time, before settling back into a steady, but noticeably dimmer beam. The faint scuttling sounds of insects had vanished. Even the drip of water seemed to cease. 17. My breath hitched. I could almost place it now, coming from just around the next bend in the passage, a mere 50 feet or so ahead. The sound was no longer just in my headphones. It seemed to be vibrating through the rock, through my very bones. My legs finally found their strength, but not to run. To stand. To turn. I took a single agonizing step towards the bend, my headlamp beam shaking wildly. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, but something held me. A morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand. Or perhaps, a paralyzing terror that rendered me incapable of anything but facing it. 16. It was so close now. The echoes were almost gone. It was right there. I took another step, then another, pushing through the suffocating fear, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I rounded the bend, and there, standing in the gloom, illuminated by my flickering headlamp, was me. Not a reflection, not an apparition. It was me, wearing the same jumpsuit, the same scuffed boots, carrying the same backpack, even the same brand of headlamp on its identical helmet. My face, my hair, the mole on my left cheek. Every detail was perfect, and from its mouth, in my voice, the count continued. 15. It wasn't moving. It just stood there, facing away from me, towards the deeper reaches of the cave. Its back was to me, but I knew it was me. The feeling of absolute, utter wrongness was overwhelming. My mind screamed in protest, trying to reconcile the impossible. I couldn't breathe. My lungs burned, demanding air, but I was frozen, trapped in a nightmare made real. This wasn't some creature or monster. This was me, and it was counting down. What did 0 mean? Was it a point of origin? A destination? A disappearance? 14. The sound seemed to reverberate from inside my own skull. The air grew even colder, a freezing sensation that went straight to my bones. I felt a wave of nausea, threatening to overwhelm me. My headlamp flickered again, almost dying this time, plunging the scene into near darkness for a terrifying second before sputtering back to life. I couldn't tear my eyes away from myself. It was too horrifying, too fascinating. My doppelganger remained still, a statue of dread, as the final numbers echoed through the cavern. 13, 12, 11, 10. Each number felt like a lifetime. My body was screaming, but I was rooted to the spot. My head spun with questions, with impossible theories. Had I somehow traveled through time? Was this a glimpse of my own past, playing out in reverse? But how? And why? 9, 8, 7, 6. The doppelganger's voice was now perfectly clear, perfectly my voice, as if I were speaking it myself. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then a profound silence. The cold intensified, a sharp, biting cold that felt like it was tearing through my very essence. My headlamp flickered one last time, a final gasp before dying completely. Total darkness. And then, just as my eyes struggled to adjust, just as the silence threatened to crush me, I saw it. A faint glimmer of light, far down the passage, at the very entrance to the cave. And silhouetted against that distant, impossible light was me, walking out, my yesterday self, leaving the cave. The light vanished. The doppelganger in front of me was gone. The cold receded, leaving only the dampness and the oppressive silence of the cave. I stood there, trembling, for what felt like an eternity. I don't remember how I got out. I just remember scrambling, clawing my way through the darkness, adrenaline screaming through my veins. When I finally burst out into the late afternoon sun, it felt wrong. Too bright, too warm, too normal. I never went back. I left my equipment, my research, everything. I resigned from my position. People think I had a breakdown, that the isolation got to me. Maybe they're right, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And sometimes, when I'm alone in the dark, I still hear a faint whisper, just at the edge of hearing, starting to count. And I know with a terrible certainty that somewhere in some cave, in some time, I'm still counting down to 0. And I don't want to know what happens when it reaches 0 again.